welcome everybody to another episode of Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate, a journey of emotional resilience. We're here with our last journey segment for the month of March. Really excited as we're going back to Australia, to Sydney this time, with another great guest who has a really amazing story to share. So most of the time that I introduce my guests, I don't use their middle name, but I think for this person it is appropriate. So I would like to welcome Courtney HOPE Strong to the podcast today, and just really want everybody to take some time to listen to this one, as Courtney has a really amazing story, dealing with a lot of different things growing up and an eating disorder, and how she has handled that, and then what she does today to work on recovery, but also spread the message and hope for recovery in mental health challenges. So welcome, Courtney. How are you doing today?
I'm really good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here and being willing to share your story, and just be willing to open up and be vulnerable as we go into this. So I really appreciate your time, little extra time as we go through this. So I'm excited for you to jump into it today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so just kind of, going into it and your experiences, especially early on, when was it where you first kind of started noticing, something wrong maybe, or some mental health challenges? And was there anything that started adding to that, or starting to develop that as you were younger?
Yeah, so the first time I kind of noticed something was wrong, probably when I was around 12 years old, entering high school, like my first year of high school. And I really started to notice myself get super anxious in social situations surrounding friends. And I would basically live to other people and live to get other people's validation and approval. And if I didn't, that would absolutely just send me spiraling. And it was really quite a negative relationship I had with myself.
Yeah, at that age, just noticing that you had that negative relationship with yourself, did you know where that was coming from, or could you really identify where it was coming from, or what those feelings were?
No, so at that age, I had no knowledge about health or mental health. So I really didn't know what was going on. I just thought, oh, I'm not entirely happy with myself, and I need to do this to become happier, or I need to do this to be better and to be a better person and have people like me and all of that. I really didn't know what it was stemming from or what was causing it, because I wasn't educated on mental health at all.
Yeah, and I always, when I look back at my early years and trying to identify that, I just remember feeling different, and like something was wrong. I couldn't, like you were just saying, like I couldn't identify. I wasn't educated in that. My parents actually put me in anger management when I was young, because that's kind of how that came out when I was younger, and that was just there wasn't as much mental health awareness as I was growing up, and so like it's really hard when we're that age, trying to just figure out who we are as people anyway, and then when you add on some different things that are going on in our heads and some thoughts and feelings, it can make that process a lot more complicated. And so I know you mentioned like needing that approval and that validation from other people. So how did that look for you early on in your life?
Yeah, so I would mostly try to get these validations from friends at school. And I would basically, if someone asked me to do something, I would and I would put them before my own needs and really just work so hard to try to get them to like that. Because I guess at the time I wasn't valuing myself and I didn't know anything like that at all. So I really just was more working and putting in so much work into relationships where half the time getting that back.
And that's I think that's an interesting thing of putting in all that work and, not getting it back, right? Makes relationships a lot harder, and it kind of makes you feel less than in some of those relationships at times. Um, and so I know you had mentioned like being bullied and, kind of how that added to, your experiences dealing with that. So would you go into just a little bit of that and kind of how that affected those early struggles anyway?
Yeah, of course. So the bullying for me was relentless and did not stop. Like, I would be so terrified to go into school. I would be hurt at school. I would be, verbally abused. Like, get told all of these awful negative things, but then I was terrified to go home because I it became such like a thing that she harassed me online at home and all of that kind of stuff. So I was constantly living in this state, being absolutely terrified to exist. And then that really reinforced all of this that I was feeling, that, oh, I was trying so hard to get people to like me. But then I have this person here telling me that people don't actually value me and that I'm like less than everyone. And it was just this constant cycle of, these are my feelings and this is what I feel about myself, but this is then now reinforced by outside of myself, and that just made it so much more real.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. When we already lack some self-confidence or doubt ourselves, it's hard enough dealing with those own thoughts in our head. So then when you do hear other people say it and, kind of put that out loud, then it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm right. I am less than. I'm not worthy of these friendships or these relationships or these things in my life, and that just piles on and make things a lot harder. So how did you handle that? Um, at such a young age, and then not only how did you handle it, but how was the school handling it, and then how was your parents handling it as well? Did everybody know what was going on and was supporting you, or was it kind of like that mentality of, oh, kids are kids, right? They're gonna be mean, and that you got to put up with it. So kind of, what was that like as well in that situation?
Yeah, so I initially just handled the bullying by myself. I wasn't really talking about it to like literally anyone until it got to the extent that I just couldn't cope with it anymore. So I told my parents, and my parents were really supportive. But because I wasn't telling my parents anything, they helped. And it got to the stage where, something really big happened and school involved, and thankfully the school got involved, but I was terrified of the backlash that would come from that. And when the school did intervene, the girl ended up getting like suspended and all of that kind of stuff. And then when she was suspended back to school, it didn't stop, and the school was still aware of it. So I didn't get a lot of from the school, but I got a lot from my older sister, who was amazing during that time for me.
Yeah, how important was that? How important was that relationship with your older sister and just being able to get some of those things out and talk to her about what was going on with school and being bullied?
It was amazing. She was the only person I could talk to, feel like safe doing it, and nothing would happen if I were with her. And it was so amazing. We went to the same school as, and it was great to have like that one person that I could go to if something happened, all that stuff. So she really huge protector.
Yeah, and I like that you said you felt safe, right? Because I think that's what keeps us from opening up to people a lot of the time, or sharing or talking to people, is because we don't always feel comfortable or safe, or we don't want to be vulnerable in those moments. So I think that's a really great relationship to be able to have in a moment like that. But I mean, it doesn't make it any easier, but it's still, at least you have some type of somebody being there for you. But as you were going through this and kind of struggling, with those mental health thoughts, or the anxiety behind it of being at school or going home, or what was going to happen from these various situations, how did you what was your coping mechanisms like at that stage in your life, and how did those kind of develop?
Because of the bullying, my brain was so anxious. It was searching for literally any way to cope. And the only way my brain thought to cope through really behaviors. And for me, that was like initially a lot of very self-harming behaviors. Also, go for like nicotine, relying on vapes to ease anxiety, all of that, those two playing at the same. And it was really, but at the time, my brain was like, this is the way that makes us feel better, the way that we can right now.
And those are really, tough things to be doing at that age, and especially the self-harm one. And then, obviously nicotine's not not good for us either. But with what you said about your brain saying this is how we cope with it, right? This feels good in the moment. This releases some of that anxiety. Did you have any negative consequences to doing those things? Like, did you ever get caught? Did you ever, did any of that ever, like, was there ever those little moments where it's like, oh, this is actually wrong that I'm doing that, even though it makes me feel good in the moment?
I was never caught. I think because I kind of reacted so fine. Like everything was great. I was always known as like the really bubbly person. So like nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew what I was using with, and I was never caught. And I think it's really difficult to actually catch on if they aren't actually aware. And so people didn't catch, and it went completely under the radar for me.
And you said that you kind of came across as bubbly, right? And happy. And did anybody ever point that out to you and like, oh, you're just you're happy, you're bubbly, you're this or that, even though you didn't feel it?
Yeah, so in my family, I was always known as the one who was, happy and positive and, oh, Courtney's the one who will, be kind and all of that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't like that at all. Like I deeply was truly unhappy during this time, but like because of the shame I felt, I was never didn't open up, and I was terrified to do that. And so I did.
Was it frustrating for you? I know, like, when I never felt good about myself. I always struggled internally with every aspect of myself, whether it was how I interacted, whether it was, how good I was at something, whether it was the way I looked, or the way I interacted with people. I was always very self-conscious and never felt like I was doing that well enough. And so it would frustrate me and almost make me angry when people would be like, oh, you're so this or you're so that, these positive things. How did you take it when people talked about you in a positive light, even though like you weren't necessarily feeling that internally?
There was probably two parts of that. Is that the one part, like, oh, I'm so glad I don't know I'm struggling. And I'm so glad that I come across as, this happy person and the person that people when they're struggling. But on the other hand, like I am struggling so hard right now, and I can't open up about it. And in that sense, it's kind of painful to go through that. People think you're okay when you're not.
Yeah, and I just, I'm always curious of, you know, that sense of it because it was such a big. I remember just I didn't like getting compliments and stuff like that. And so like, as you kept going through high school and getting towards the end of your high school years and everything, um, was that something, did things get easier to cope with, or did it just keep getting worse for you as that time went on?
Going through high school, eventually the bullying did stop. So in that aspect, yes, that got a lot better for me. But I had to then deal with so much extra things that came from the bullying, a lot of like suppression of emotions and all of that kind of stuff. So in that sense, it didn't really get easier, and I had to find new ways to cope, and I still didn't feel safe at school, and I didn't feel like I could trust a lot of people either. So in that sense, it didn't.
And like with the thoughts of still being scared of at school, or having to trust people, it sounds like that bullying like really affected your external life as well, of just how you approach things and how you thought of, or how you handled yourself in certain situations. And you said you had to keep finding ways to cope. So as you got older, maybe the bullying went away, but did some of those negative coping habits, that you had mentioned, the nicotine or the vaping or the self-harm, did those continue or get worse? And was there a point where it kind of stopped?
There was a point where I kind of stopped, not because it was an intentional stop, but there was a point where in my own personal life, I had just experienced the loss of a family member, and we were all together, my whole family and extended family. So I wasn't actually able to continue with any of these behaviors. So because of that, I was like, maybe I should find like a little bit of like a healthier way to cope, or like a healthier way to do different things. And I did find a healthier way. I kind of like fell into a little bit of like spirituality, in the sense of believing in the fact that, oh, everything happens for a reason, and that really helped, and that really got me through. And eventually it kind of stopped working, in the sense, and then I fell back into the behaviors.
Was and I ask this because I deal with death and losing somebody pretty poorly. I don't like, grief can really consume me, and I have a hard time with that still in my life, just from experiences of losing people and where I was at when those things happened. Um, did you struggle going through that, or did those moments of spirituality really kind of help with those feelings of loss?
I really struggled going through it. I was really, really close with my uncle who passed away, and I really, really looked up to him, and he really inspired me in so many different ways. And he was spiritual, so I kind of was like, well, it worked for him, so like maybe it will work for me. And that really got me through, because it not only was I able to like hold on to like some part of him, I actually like shifted my mindset a little bit in that during that time as well. And yeah, it did really help with the grief and the loss as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate you kind of just like going into that a little bit more, because like I said, I know loss isn't easy, and grief can be really consuming. So when you found that those moments, maybe something a little bit better in this spirituality and how that looked and worked for you, when did things kind of start going back to those negative coping mechanisms for you?
Things started to go very fast downhill once I graduated, and I have I realized why now, like going through a lot of it in therapy and everything like that. But I was I stopped being in this environment where it was terrifying, and I wasn't there anymore, and my brain was just like, oh, how do we cope with this now? And it kind of like switched coping mechanisms completely, and I was in such an anxious state where I literally could not leave my house for like 3 months, because my brain was just like, what is going on? So I had to find some new coping mechanisms, and they progressively were not good ones either.
What did those ones kind of look like, or what did those end up turning into?
Yeah, so initially it looked like working out and exercising and using that as a means to control anxiety. But that kind of then manifested into controlling what I was eating as a form of relaxing my brain and all of that kind of stuff. So I eventually merged from this exercise to controlling what I was eating and rigorously counting calories and everything like that. And it was just yeah, really manifested as that.
With that, were you kind of just going back in your mindset when that started happening? Were you aware of the possibility of developing an eating disorder, or was that like ever even a thought early on where it started progressing?
I was never initially aware. I was so, I think, blind to the fact that I was struggling again. And my mum was the one who initially caught onto it because she also has had a history in her teenage years of disordered eating. And so she was the one who caught onto it, and it created a lot of tension between us. She was like, "What's going on? Like, why are you doing this?" And I was like, "I'm not doing anything. I'm perfectly fine. Like, what do you mean?" And so it did create a lot of arguments and tension, and eventually it started to like make our relationship with each other decline as well.
Was there a point where you um, maybe saw what she was talking about, or did that point take a while to come?
It definitely took a while to come because I feel like the thing with eating disorders and a lot of other issues as well is that you can't actually see what you're doing. And I would, look in the mirror, I would see the exact same thing as I was like a year ago. And when in reality, I was, losing a lot of weight and rapidly declining in my health as well. And I couldn't see that. I was completely blind to the fact. And, the eating disorder, it brings down kind of like blinds over you to like, so you can ignore completely what's happening. So you can completely just continue in the eating disorder. It doesn't want to feel threatened and it wants to stay safe. And because of that, it completely shields you from the fact that there is an issue. So it took a lot of time to actually realize that there is something wrong.
Yeah, and I think it's, when we go into those habits that start to develop and becoming coping mechanisms that are negative and that just take over our lives, like we don't, we don't go into it thinking, oh, that's what I'm going to become, that's where I'm going to end up as I'm doing this. Because like you just said, we don't see those things. We don't see it. I saw my especially early drug use is like, oh, I'm just having fun. I'm young, I'm experimenting, and I'm just having fun with it right now. I'm in college. I had a soccer scholarship. My grades were okay at the time. I had decent relationships, but I was really blinded by the fact of what it was doing to me internally, and like just the fact that I was struggling to hold on to any of those good things I had. Um, so, it just makes me curious, how did that disordered eating affect your external things? Like as this started to get worse and as it started to progress, how did it affect maybe your other relationships or, your exercise you had mentioned, your workplace, like just anything else you were doing?
Yeah, so well, obviously it really impacted my relationship with my parents and my sister as well. And so not only did it negatively impact that, I wouldn't go out with my friends anymore because I didn't want to risk having to eat out or to not have like the choice of whether or not I would be eating. And so I would I completely stopped seeing my friends, and I I started university and I wasn't able to focus. I was constantly just trying to plan and exercise, and I wouldn't show up to class. And my grades were struggling. So I ended up dropping out of university halfway through the semester. And that was completely because of my eating disorder. And it really just negatively, it just chips away at your life bit by bit. And it takes and takes and takes until there's like nothing more.
What's going through, your head, and like what are some of those thoughts as that eating disorder is chipping away at your life? Like do you start to recognize like, oh, this really is controlling me? Or was there like one really big moment where it kind of, hit you in the face that like, hey, I have your life now and I'm going to control and this is how we're going to live? kind of what were some of those thoughts as you started to see like, okay, I'm dropping out now. Okay, I'm not hanging out with my friends as much. What was that thought process like?
Yeah, absolutely. When things started to take like a rapid decline, my parents kind of like staged intervention and placed me in like with a therapist. And I'm so grateful for that because that truly made a world of difference. But initially I was treatment resistant because I didn't want it. I was like, I'm completely fine. Like I don't know what you're talking about. I want to get better because I find so much comfort in my eating disorder and by doing these behaviors. And as I rapidly started to decline, I was kind of like hit in the face of, I was facing so many medical issues because of this then. And because of these medical issues, my treatment team were kind of like, you either need to change or we have to admit you into an inpatient facility. And my doctor just completely had forms like sitting there in front of me, printed out, filled out, ready to go. And she was like, you have a couple of days to make a choice, or you're going to, like, we have no choice but to admit you into a facility.
Was the like I know so you mentioned an intervention with your parents and starting therapy, and then your actual doctor saying like, look, medically this is where you're going to end up in a couple days. Did that all happen at once, or did that intervention in the therapy happen a good time before like the your doctor got involved with some medical issues?
Yeah, it was a pretty good time before. I would say timeline, a couple of like, I would say 6 months and in between
Okay.
starting therapy and then and it was mainly because I was, just so not wanting to do anything to get better and rapidly declining myself that my therapist and my GP basically just had a phone call and was like, there's not a lot out that will work at this point. And yeah, it was, yeah.
with with therapy and going to therapy, because I know like when I was really on hard drugs and my life was just going downhill fast, and I didn't want to accept. There was like I'd have certain things like that where I would open up a little bit, or I would acknowledge that, okay, yeah, I might have a problem, but that never changed my behavior at that point. Like, yeah, I would try some things out just to make other people happy around me. Is that kind of where you were at with the therapy? Like you were just doing some of this to make people happy, but you still were fully involved in that habit?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go to these appointments, but I would do it purely to please my parents, to make my parents be like, oh, actually, when in reality, I wasn't. And I really didn't want it. And I think my therapist also knew that. And she knew. And it was really hard to try. She would be like, can we try to do some coping skills? And I would just be like, no, I don't want to. Like, I was such hard work because I was just so not willing to make any change whatsoever.
Yeah, because it usually takes a lot for us to get to that point where it's like, all right, I do need to make a change. And, so now kind of going back to to your doctor and the medical issues and those inpatient forms, sitting right there in your face that like, hey, this is a real possibility now that I'm about to have to commit to something like that. If I don't even try a little bit now. So kind of what was that process like of what were your thoughts of actually going to inpatient therapy or in inpatient care to make sure you were getting what you needed? What was your thoughts going into that moment?
Yeah, I feel like because me personally, my eating disorder was centered around so much of control and having control over this particular thing to ease this anxiety or this deep feeling or this thought. It was like so terrifying to have these papers right in front of me being like, you're this is what you're going to have, because I didn't want that complete control away from me, because that's what exactly what would happen. And I just felt so terrified because I was like, I don't think I could cope if I had everything taken, like all control taken away from me, and it was all completely out of my hands. So I like discussed it with my therapist, She was like, look, we can either make a change now and do a little bit better and become more stable, or you will have all control taken away from you. And I was like, okay, the choice is you can either choose to control this small portion to get a little bit better, or I can just completely stripped of control. And that was really the main factor, was the fear of everything just taken away.
How did that start to change your approach with your therapist, or how did that start to change your approach with just making some small changes? Was it just to please in that moment and to prevent the impatient, or did you kind of start to buy into it as you started making some of those small changes?
Initially, it was bare minimum. I was like, I'm doing the bare minimum to stay out of hospital and to stay everything like that. And then as you start to do the work and actually engage in therapy, at least for me, and as I was starting to eat a bit more as well, your brain starts to actually get and actually think clearly instead of just this pure black and white thinking. And because of all the work that I was doing the bare minimum, it was more like, oh, actually, I'm getting these aspects of my life back. Like I got this amazing job that I absolutely adore. My parents were starting to trust me again. And I was starting to like rebuild relationships with my friends that I had completely just left in the dust. And I was like, wait, there are things happening now that are better. So maybe I should just like keep trying.
And I love the wording of how you said that, of just like doing the bare minimum, but then those bare minimum rewards and results that start to creep in. And sometimes that's all we can do. Sometimes that's all we have the ability to do, is that bare minimum. I know, like for me, that's where I was on when I went to rehab. I was either facing jail, so losing all control of my life, or going to rehab. And I was like, well, I didn't think I'm gonna last in jail, so I might want to just give rehab a try here. And that was my thought process. It was like, I drank on my way to rehab. I was I was putting down liquor as much as I could before I went in that building. And I really went in with the mindset of, this is going to be bare minimum. I'm going to do what I have to while I'm here to get out, to go home, and to just pick up where I left off. And it was those little things I started to do in there that I was like, oh, this kind of feels good, right? Like you start getting some of those good feelings back. And I love that you said you stop thinking black and white and it's a little more clear. And because that's where we are when we're in those dark moments. We're like, oh, it's that one extreme or the other. It's hard to see that balance. So, as you started to see that balance, you started to get some of those positive things back. I'm assuming it wasn't a smooth ride to where things, just kept on riding out until your life was perfect and and everything was better. So what was that process like, as you started seeing some of those good benefits, and things started to look a little bit better, was it rocky? Was it tough? Was it an up and down ride, basically, as you started going through that?
Yeah, it was definitely not as smooth sailing at all. Recovery is so not a linear thing that everyone makes it out to be. And I have had so many setbacks and so many like different bumps in the road. And it's taken a lot of hard work to get through that and to get to the point that I am now. And every single time I would have a setback, I would be like, that's it, I'm done. I'm not trying again. Like, that's it for me. And that's why I'm so grateful that I had like a therapist and a support system that I had in place, because every single time she would remind me, why are we doing this? Like, you saw a little glimpse of this freedom. Like, can we keep going? Can we keep pushing because of these reasons? And that's why I kept going.
Were you hard on yourself? I know you said you were just wanted to give up, or you're not going to do it again with those setbacks, but um, were you hard on yourself when those setbacks would happen?
I was really, really hard on myself. Yeah. And it would just be like every single time I had a setback, I would be like, oh, I failed again. Like, that's it. Like, I'm a complete failure. Like, I can't even do recovery. Like, and so it really took a lot to like push back against those really hard thoughts that I had on myself as well, and to give myself like grace and compassion. And that's something that I'm still working on, but self-compassion to me is like so important.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you said that, because I was just thinking, did you give yourself some compassion and some a break, like you said, some grace in those moments, because I thought you put it really well. Like, recovery is not an easy thing. It's not where you start it, from a recovery from anything. It's not where you just start it and things are just all uphill. You're going to hit some major setbacks, some bigger than others, and it just it can make it tough to keep going. But obviously, you're able to keep going right now. So each time you had that setback, I know I got tools early on to where when I started to have those depressive episodes or those anxiety attacks, to where I would immediately go get high over. I had new tools to be able to say, like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm feeling. Now I can do something a little healthier. You know, did you find those tools as you went that made those setbacks? Yeah, they might have been tough and hard, but you had new ways of handling them.
Yeah, absolutely. And through the process that I had with the cognitive behavioral therapy that I was going through, the whole basis of that is that it's not going to make you magically cured or magically not sad or, anything like that. It gives the process of giving your thoughts less power. And through like a technique that my therapist gave me was like thought diffusion, was to recognize when I was having really negative thoughts, or if I'm having like eating disorder behavior thoughts. It's like, well, it's just a thought. I don't have to act on it. It's not me. I don't have to act on it if I don't want to. And it's just that. It's just a thought. It's not real. And that for me really helps me recognize that when I am struggling and when I'm having really, really dark thoughts or really, really just anxious thoughts, it's like, oh, that's just it. It's just a thought. Like, it's just an eating disorder thought, or it's just, anything like that. So that's what I found really, really helpful.
Yeah, and that's so powerful. That your thoughts are just that, they're thoughts, and they don't have to be you. You don't have to go into them, and I like the way that you kind of explain that and set that up. Because there's definitely moments, where I've been like, oh, life would be a little bit easier if I could just, have a drink, or, if I could just get high one more time, release this pain. But I also know what comes of that when I choose to do it, and it's rude. Like, it's not good. And so I think, identifying those thoughts, those behaviors, and being able to change them as we go is so important in recovery. Even though, we still get them, that's okay, because that's part of the process of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to acknowledge the fact that, you know, it's not going to go away overnight and it's not going to magically get better like in an instant. But by slowly giving the thoughts less power, it's like I could, do these things that my eating disorder is telling me to, but I know the territory that it comes with. I know the fact that, like, if I do this, I give up so much in my life that I have right now.
Yeah, and that's a powerful thing, right? When our life finally, there are some good things about it, and we're happier. Maybe we could always do more, but I know, being happy in life, it's like, okay, yeah, if I do choose to mess up again, I'm gonna lose a lot. Like, I'm gonna lose a lot in my life, and I don't want that. And there's so many things that we can do in recovery, and that's kind of how I came across you, is seeing what you do in recovery. And you being on Instagram with your page, the link will be in the description, so definitely go check Courtney out on Instagram. But I love the way that you showcase recovery, and you showcase what you deal with, how you handle it, and your approach to it. So, could you give just a little bit of insight of what that looks like for you, and why you choose to do it the way you do it.
Yeah, so I started my Instagram page back in like December, coming out of a really big setback. And I really wanted to just have a creative outlet in a way to get all of the thoughts and feelings that I was having out onto something else for me that was creating videos and stuff like that, which I absolutely love doing. And that's why I continue doing it. But I really didn't want to glamorize in any way. And I know it can be glamorized so much online, the recovery process. And I find it, and I think it's so important to show that recovery isn't linear and there's no right or wrong way of doing recovery either. It's just like people can feel like if they have one minor setback or one bad day, it's like, oh, I'm doing recovery wrong. And that's exactly how I felt. I was like, oh, I'm not happy 24/7, so therefore I'm I'm failing at recovery and I should just give up. But in reality, recovery is such a long, like painful, messy, ugly process. But ultimately, it's one that is so beneficial. And yeah, that's why I do it.
And I like, because I'm of the same mindset that recovery is not one way. Recovery from anything can look different because me and you are very different people. We have different challenges, but that doesn't mean our life can't get better through recovery. It just means we might just do it a little bit differently. And so I think that's a really important aspect of it as well. And just to point out, like, yeah, some things do suck on some days, and that's okay. Some things do fall apart in recovery, and that's okay as well. We all have our different approach to it, which is why I love that messaging. And it's kind of funny because I just realized you said that. You said you started your page in December after a really big setback. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because that I've had my worst depressive episode that I've had in a very long time. Like I felt like I was on drugs again, even though I wasn't, but just mentally, that's where I was right around that time, November, December. And then I found an outlet like this. And this is, what I've been doing as well. So I didn't realize we're kind of a little similar in finding a way to do that and showcase that. But yeah, I think it's really awesome the way you showcase it. And I think it's really important the way you showcase it. And I want to ask you what that does for you. I think for me, even though we have different challenges, it's inspiring to me. And so I know it can inspire other people, especially ones that maybe a little more similar to you. But what does it do for you in that creative outlet?
It really does a lot for me. Not like it holds me really accountable as well. That sometimes I can get really caught up in my own thoughts of, oh, I'm failing again, I'm having a setback, I'm all of that kind of stuff. But then all I have to do is just, like see these beautiful messages that I get from some people being like, thank you so much for like posting the content you do because it really helped me and it makes me feel known. And messages like that really keep going because I'm like, well, I'm not alone either because I'm having these people reach out to me who are going through this or feeling the exact same way, and my content helps them feel seen and heard, and that's so special to me, and it holds such a big place, and I'm so happy that I have like a really supportive little community of beautiful people, and they're all super positive, and it keeps me going as well.
Yeah, I love this the couple of things you point out there of the accountability, right? It keeps us working at it every day when we're doing something that adds to it every day. It kind of just keeps in your thought like, oh yeah, I got to keep working on this. I got to keep growing because like recovery is that lifelong process, and sometimes I have to remember that myself that I got to do something every day to keep that going. But then that supportive community that you mentioned as well. Um, it's so important to have people around you and to just get those messages, or see those other people struggling or succeeding, because then, like you just said, you don't feel alone. And that could be one of the hardest things about mental health challenges is it tells us we are alone, we are different, we are, by ourselves in this, when in reality there are a lot of other people struggling. as well. So I really appreciate that message that you put across on there.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's really important to show people that, yeah, they can have a bad day, but that doesn't mean that they should give up. And then it's so brave to keep going if you don't want to. And it's the hardest thing in the world. But it's well, for me, the only way now, because I don't want to go back into the place where I was. And I think it's really important that people should be able to see that.
And that's what's really awesome for me, at least for doing this, is because that line you just said of it being hard and not wanting to go back, so you just do it and you get through those tough moments. I mean, I could have said those exact same words in relation to my life. And that's what's really awesome, is that even though we're two different sides of the world right now, obviously very different in in who we are and the struggles we have had, but the can have very similar emotions behind the recoveries that we have to do to stay healthy and to continue to grow in our lives. So I really love that. And again, I really appreciate your time. Just to let people know, this is our second attempt tonight at doing this, or tonight for me, morning for Courtney.
Yeah.
So we've been at this for a couple of hours. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, Courtney. And I just want to ask, as we get close to wrapping this up, is there anything else that you want to say and put out there for people listening, and relating to your story?
Yeah, the one thing that I think is so important is that it will pass. It will pass. What you're like, I have so many people telling me, like, how can you keep, I feel so awful right now, I just don't want to do it anymore. And my message to that is, it'll pass. And that's something that I've learned. So awful and so negative and so just depressed or anything like that, is that I'm confident knowing it will pass and it will get better. And so that's what I would love to tell people, that it will pass.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect way to kind of end, because when we're in those feelings, sometimes we convince ourselves they're going to last forever,
Yeah.
and those negative feelings are going to be there forever. So I think that's just something to always realize, that those things will pass and you'll be able to keep growing once they do. So again, Courtney Hope Strong, I really appreciate your time, and I love the name. I think it matches obviously what you're doing and what you've been through very, very well. So your parents did a really good job with the middle and last name
Yeah,
there.
nailed it. Really nailed it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And again, Courtney's Instagram link will be in the description. So definitely go check her out, see her message, give her a follow, and, look at some of what she's putting out there to inspire hope and empower you to recovery as well. So thank you again. Thanks for joining us. It's been Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate, and have a great rest of your day.